welcome to all of you for the Sacramento Clean Cities Coalition, as well as East Bay, Long Beach, and San Diego coalitions. We're very happy to be able to be hosting this platform today. And in that conjunction, I would like to ask Keith Leach to you all for the fleet groups that we're doing this with. So Keith, would you like to do a little bit of a welcome there?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Do you hear me?
I do.
Okay. Well, yeah, this is a terrific collaboration between the Clean Cities groups of California and, of course, the Municipal Equipment Maintenance Association of both the Northern California chapter and the Southern California chapter, and, of course, our NAFA chapters as well, Northern California and Southern California. The whole point of this workshop and a couple other follow-up workshops is for us to work together to start to plan and figure out what we're going to need to position ourselves to comply with the new CARB regulations, the governor's executive mandates that are coming at us with timelines that we're all wondering how we're going to do that, how we're going to budget for it, and what do we need to do to get ready. So we pulled together several people that have been following this very closely, and we'd like to continue to keep this collaboration going as more details become known to us, so we can share the knowledge and also provide feedback to CARB on their timelines and the feasibility and the affordability of possibly the impacts to our public fleet budgets and even some private fleet budgets for our NAFA members. So for that, I'll go ahead and turn it back to Tim. Thank you very much. We'll have ongoing discussion, as Tim mentioned. Just raise your hand and hopefully we can get to all your questions. Thank you.
And thank you, Keith. And then I just want to say, as you can see, as those of you who are attending, you can see on the screen, this is the first of a three-part series related to the issues that Keith just mentioned. Today, we're going to talk about the advanced, Dave Worthington is going to talk about the advanced clean truck regulation and some of the issues associated with that, as well as some of the purchase requirements associated with the advanced clean fleet regulation. And Dina Krieger with Geotab is going to present information about how Geotab can help with the rather extensive data collection and reporting requirements that are associated with these different regulations. On the 11th of March, we're going to have a presentation by David Rentschler with the fleet manager from Fairfield, who will talk about the heavy-duty inspection and maintenance, the enhanced, you might say, heavy-duty inspection and maintenance program with quite a few more requirements and testing opportunities, as well as monitoring that the Air Resources Board will be doing, and some of the sort of unexpected lessons learned. And then on the 25th, we will be talking about funding and planning for that transition, and also some of the strategies for monetizing carbon. Each time we will have a panel discussion following the presentations.
Good morning, everybody. My name is David Worthington. I'm a former government fleet manager. I'm currently working in the private sector as a fleet director. And today I'm going to talk about the California Air Resources Board Advanced Clean Truck Regulation and the mandatory fleet data reporting, and also the proposed Advanced Clean Fleet Regulation that will be the complement to this, as among other CARB regulations that are going to move us towards electric or hydrogen powered or any other optional zero emissions vehicle in the near future. I'd like to thank NAFA, MEMA, the Clean Cities Coalitions for putting on this presentation. I think the information that we'll be sharing today will be very valuable and important to meet the reporting deadline of April 1st, as well as position yourselves well for what's coming starting in 2024 and beyond. So what is the Advanced Clean Truck Regulation? The regulation was approved by the CARB Board of Directors on June 25th of 2020. The regulation is one piece of a set of regulations to accelerate the transition of private and government fleets to zero emissions medium and heavy duty vehicles from class 2B to class 8. Basically, any vehicle that is 8,501 pounds and above falls under this regulation. There are some exemptions, but the exemptions are very few. The regulation has two components. One is a manufacturer sales requirement, and the second is a fleet data reporting requirement. Manufacturer sales requirement is aimed at manufacturers who certify class 2B to 8 chassis or complete vehicles with combustion engines, and they're required to sell zero emissions trucks at an increasing percentage of their annual California sales from 2024 to 2035. By 2035, zero emissions truck chassis sales will need to be 55% of the class 2B to 3 truck sales, 75% of the class 4 to 8 straight truck sales, and 40% of the tractor track sales. Zero emissions vehicle technology is currently comprised of vehicles operating with an all-electric or hydrogen electric fuel cell powertrain. Near zero emissions vehicles are referenced in the regulation and are defined as on-road plug-in electric hybrid vehicles that achieve an all-electric range in operation with no defined minimum all-electric mileage range at this time. Examples of this are the Chevrolet Volt and the Toyota plug-in Prius, or among other vehicles that are plug-in hybrids. We do expect at some point in the future that CARB staff will let us know what they are looking at for minimum number of miles where these vehicles will travel on all electric. The fleet reporting requirement, who has to report? Private and government fleets that are defined as a large entity are required to submit fleet-related data to CARB through the use of a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. And this is very important. We have to do that prior to April 1st of this year, which doesn't leave us much time depending on the size of your fleet and the data that you currently have or the data that you've got to comprise. Large entity organizations are defined as private companies with revenues greater than $50 million in the US for the 2019 tax year, including revenues from all subsidiary subdivisions, branches that had one or more vehicles under common ownership or control that were operated in California in 2019, or vehicles under common ownership or control that were operated in California in 2019. Or any fleet owner in 2019 calendar year that had 50 or more vehicles under common ownership or control, or any broker or entity that dispatched 50 or more vehicles into or throughout California in the 2019 calendar year, or any California government agency, including all state and local municipalities that had one or more vehicles that were operated in California in 2019. And then finally, or any federal government agency that had one or more vehicles that were operated in California in 2019. If you read through that list again, they've done a very good job at making sure that they incorporate pretty much every private and government fleet in the regulation based on a number of different criteria. Exemptions are K through 12 school bus fleets, transit fleets, military tactical vehicles, vehicles awaiting sale, non-emergency vehicles, or emergency vehicles as defined in section 2012C do not have to report data. Emergency vehicles are defined in the California Vehicle Code, and I have the link there, and we'll be sharing the PDF version of the presentation later, and it will be a link that you can click on and will take you directly to that vehicle code section. It's very important to read that section. There's a lot of misunderstandings about what an emergency vehicle is. You know, I'll give you a quick example. Vehicles that are dispatched for public works are not considered emergency vehicles. It's a very narrow definition. It's mainly law enforcement. So I encourage you to go to that link and read what an emergency vehicle is to make sure that you can communicate to the leadership in your organization in regards to what is and is not an emergency vehicle and how this regulation is going to impact you. What's the information that we have to report by April 1st? Basic information is a company or government agency name, contact information, and regulatory information, such as the CARB trucker's ID for private fleets, the NACA code, and I have the link there where you can look up what your code number is, motor carrier identification number, U.S. Department of Transportation number, if applicable, the California carrier identification number or the California Public Utilities Commission Transportation Charter Permit number. For private companies, you'll have to report your approximate annual revenues from 2019. You'll have to report if you have a sustainability plan, if you do or not. And if you do, there's a couple questions about that. You also have to report contracted subhaulers and their vehicle count if applicable. A lot of this information is described in the spreadsheet that CARB has on their website. So take heart in knowing that what you're seeing on this screen is just a high level presentation of the information, but when you get into working in the Excel spreadsheet, it has very detailed information in regards to answering these questions. You'll have to also report facility information, and that's each facility that vehicles operate out of. And the information you're going to have to report is name, address, contact person information, facility type, is a facility leased or owned, and is there fueling infrastructure on site? For a lot of fleets, we have multiple facilities or vehicles are dispatched from different areas. So you're going to need to look at where the vehicles are dispatched from, where they're parked each evening, and come up with a facility name and report the data for that location. This is a screenshot of the large entity reporting spreadsheet showing the information that you would enter in. Off to the right where it says click here to reset form, if you click on the little red arrows, it'll give you information in regards to the entry that you're going to make. So it's very helpful, but this is a quick shot of just the basic information that you'll gather and you'll input into the spreadsheet. What information is and data is to be reported? You're going to need to report vehicle information such as vehicle body types. Here's several different examples of what they're looking for. Do you have a box dry van? Do you have a dump truck, a flatbed? Is it a garbage truck? Is it a pickup truck, a sweeper? Does it have a service body? Is it a Class 8 tractor? You're going to need to report the fuel types. Is it gasoline powered, diesel, natural gas, hydrogen, electric, or other? And to be clear, natural gas, compressed natural gas, your other alternative fuels are not exempt from this reporting. You're going to need to report the information. They've made it a little bit simpler since their original proposal. You need to break down the vehicles by weight class bins, and they have the choices, as you see here, limited. So you're not having to go and break down all the classes and report that information. So they're looking at class 2B to 3, 4 to 6, and 7 to 8. And I've included the gross vehicle ranges there. And again, all this regulation starts with 8,501 pounds and above. You have to report the vehicle group quantities, the percentage of the vehicle group that operates up to an average of 100, 150, 200, and 300 miles per day, the highest approximate average percentage of a vehicle group that was dispatched at the same time over the last 3 years on behalf of local, state, or federal government to support emergency operation. That's important for the government fleets. If you had a lot of time, miles, engine hours in response to recent fires and public power shutoffs, it behooves you to report that data, which will help them reduce the number of miles applicable to government fleets. Now, the vehicle information needs to also be inputted on percentage increments, and they're 10%. So they go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100. And those percentage data that you're reporting on is the percentage of vehicles that have a predictable usage pattern, vehicles that have a primary means of fueling at a home base, a percentage of the vehicles that typically return to the facility daily. Does the vehicle group stay within approximately 50 miles of the indicated facility? The vehicles that tow a trailer more than 100 miles per day. vehicles that commonly operate at their weight limit, and that would be gross vehicle weight limit. Vehicles not registered in California, vehicles that regularly parked at a facility more than 8 hours per day, vehicles that are equipped with GPS or some other form of mileage tracking system. A good example of another form would be using your fuel station data where users input the mileage into the pump prior to usage. That would be another form of collecting mileage or tracking mileage. How many of the vehicles or the percentage that are equipped with all-wheel drive? Vehicles that are not being operated or used for backup vehicles. Average annual mileage for a typical vehicle in the vehicle group. How long the vehicles are typically kept after acquisition in years. And you need to identify the vehicles in the vehicle group that are dispatched under a brokerage authority. That's mainly related to private fleets. Additional information is the start date of your analysis and the end date of your analysis. You'll need to keep records of when you chose to collect this information, whether it be January 2019 to the end of that calendar year or some other measurement of time. It doesn't have to be a full calendar year. It can be a quarter, it could be half a year. It could span over 2 years, 2019 and 2020, but whatever date range that you're using to collect all this data and submit it to CARB, you're going to need to track when you started, when you ended that date range, as well as all your calculations. CARB will have the ability to request that data, and there are fines associated with not answering their requests in a timely fashion. This is another example of the spreadsheet that CARB is using, and it shows you how entries are made. And this is just one fleet. So you choose in the home base. This is just one particular facility, the vehicle body type. And in here we have concrete pump, water trucks, van, cargo, service body, flatbed or stake bed. These are all choices that are in the spreadsheet itself. So you're just going to go through there and click on which choice you want and then answer it and go on to the next data field. The fuel type, whether it's diesel, gasoline, electric, or other. And then the weight class bin. And again, you're not doing all the classes individually. You have 4 choices of weight class bins that the vehicles will fit in. Then you're going to do the number of vehicles in that class. And one example in here is the flatbed and stake bed. You'll see that there's 2 different groups there, weight bin classes. So you're going to have to separate that out, as well as if you had flatbed or stake bed that's gasoline. You'll see that that's separated out a little bit lower on that spreadsheet. Off to the right are the percentages of the vehicles that operate over, again, 100 miles per day, 150 miles per day, 200, 300, and then above 300. You'll choose a percentage which varies between 10% and 100% to place in those cells, or 0 if none of them meet the minimum 100 miles. Help in determining the weight class bin. A lot of us do not have the gross vehicle weight ratings in our fleet management systems. And so that makes it very difficult to figure out which bin it goes in. NHTSA has a great website where you can enter in a vehicle's VIN number, and it will give you the weight class distribution for that particular vehicle. So up at the top, I have the website address to make it easy. The next page, here's an example. Entered in the VIN number, and it came up as a 2015 Ram truck. Gives you the manufacturer, the vehicle type, model year, make, model, body class, and then down towards the bottom, you have the gross vehicle weight rating. And for this example, it says class 2E, 6,001 to 7,000 pounds. Using this as an example, that vehicle would not be one that you enter into the spreadsheet and report because it is under 8,500 pounds gross vehicle weight rating. Here's another example. This is a large GMC truck, and I wanted to point this out because it says the vehicle is incomplete, meaning it was a cab and chassis that was sold from a dealership or manufacturer, and the body was placed on it later. So in this case, the body class is incomplete. chassis cab, number of cab unknown. The next page that you would see if you had this up on your screen and entered a VIN number again would be the weight class bin that this would fit into. So these are links that you'll need to use. The top one is the reporting requirements webpage. That's related, that's right off of the Advanced Clean Trucks CARB website. The next one, which is very important, is the one-time reporting guide. You'll need to be reading that guide and working through the spreadsheet hand in hand. Gives you a lot of valuable information to make sure you're not over-analyzing the data and that you're only reporting what you need to report. And then there's also an FAQ for a quick read to understand the fleet reporting that you need to have done again by April 1st of this year. Before you can actually report your data, you've got to go in and request a unique ID number. That unique ID number will be one that you enter into the spreadsheet. And then when your spreadsheet is submitted, it is attributed to your particular fleet. So here we have the website address to get to that request page for your unique ID. And then there's a screenshot on the right of what that particular web page looks like. You're going to enter in your email address, your federal tax ID number, and you're going to request your ID. You'll receive the ID in an email, and then you can go back in, enter that into the spreadsheet prior to submitting all of your data. You'll come back to the screen, and then you'll upload your data where it says upload data here. Additional requirements: record used for the data submission must be kept until December 31st, 2024 and be available for CARB staff to review upon request. The records to be retained include mileage record used in the data submission, vehicle registration, other records or information that was used to determine the submission responses. Fleets must respond to requests for clarification of reported information from CARB staff within 14 days of the request. Very important that you remember that. You have 2 weeks basically to answer their request. You may receive a response from them asking for additional information, which would restart the clock. But very important that you respond to CARB staff. And in order to make sure that you're not caught off guard, make sure that the information you initially input for point of contact is correct. If somebody starts the submission and they're no longer in charge of that, you've got to make sure you go back into that spreadsheet and change who the point of contact is. This is a question that's come up because of on the CARB website and the information that's being shared currently, it states that the Office of Administrative Law has not yet approved the regulation. As a result, any information provided at this time is voluntary. The latest information about that approval process is shown in the link that I have down below. The last information that I saw yesterday was a submittal at the beginning of this month, February, and the Office of Law, their review of the submission from CARB was that they didn't see any problems with it. So I do expect that it's going to be approved, and I do expect that that's going to happen before April 1st. This is not a reason to stop collecting the data and not submitting it. If you feel comfortable that you have all the data and you have no problems with the submittal process, you could wait until closer to April 1st to verify if this is accepted by the OAL. But I highly encourage everybody not to wait too long. I would get the data into them sooner rather than later. So that is a reporting requirement for the Advanced Clean Transportation Regulation, which again was mainly set up for manufacturer minimum requirements of sales of vehicles. The companion regulation that will be coming out sometime here in the near future is taking the fleets, the data that we've submitted, and coming up with requirements of the vehicles, either by percentage or quantities, that we have to purchase, which supports the manufacturers producing the vehicles for sale in California. So this is a second part of the Advanced Clean Transportation regulation. The large entity reporting data submitted to CARB will be used to determine the fleet zero emission vehicle purchase requirements that will lead to the goal of achieving a zero emissions truck and bus California fleet by 2045, everywhere feasible, and significantly earlier for certain market segments such as last mile delivery and drayage applications. There's a lot of focus on having the drayage trucking portion of our industry comply as soon as possible, which means either beginning in 2023 or 2024. CARB staff will be submitting their recommended compliance strategy proposal that matches the manufacturer's sales requirements for fleets to the CARB board for approval by the end of this calendar year, most likely November or December. CARB staff industry workshops will be held before then to gather input from the fleet management industry on compliance strategies. Very important to encourage as many fleets and fleet managers and supervisors or people in a leadership role to attend those workshops and provide input to CARB staff. We're a very complex industry and they can't know every different application or challenge that we have. The only way that they can act upon that type of information is if it's submitted officially through a workshop or other means. So it's very important that we have as many people from the private and public fleets join in on these workshops and present their information or challenges or insight into areas that CARB may not be looking into that may be very challenging to convert over to zero emissions vehicles. The potential compliance strategies that are out there right now that CARB staff have been talking about are requiring a zero emissions vehicle percentage of an overall fleet size that begins at 5% in 2024 or 2025 and increases over time until it reaches 100% by 2035. One of the other options is requiring vehicle purchases to be a certain percentage, such as 50% from 2024 to 2026, that increases to 100% at a future date, such as 2027. Those are two distinctly different strategies. One is requiring the entire percentage of your fleet to be zero emissions vehicles during certain timeframes. The other is requiring your normal purchases to reach a percentage of your overall purchases that are zero emissions vehicles. Make sure you understand that those are two different strategies. Not quite sure which way they're going to go or if they're going to do a combination of both of those to some extent. They're also currently allowing plug-in electric vehicles to be purchased for specific applications where ZEVs are not operationally suitable. But again, in that case, we need to wait and see what CARB staff come up with as far as the mileage requirement of those plug-in electric vehicles. We have an upcoming fleet rule workshop, and CARB's invited us, again, private and government fleets, to partake in that workshop and provide information. That workshop, there's two workshops or webinars scheduled for March 2nd and March 4th. They're identical sessions that are being offered for stakeholders, but you must register to attend those sessions. And they've changed. If you registered previously, they are requesting that you go back and register again for the March 2nd evening meeting. So if you've already registered for these meetings, please go back in and register again. I've provided the link at the bottom for those workshops, and I encourage everyone to attend. Here's some additional information. The Advanced Clean Fleets website link, the primary point of contact for the Advanced Clean Fleet, the email address, and the direct phone number to CARB staff. I encourage anybody with questions to reach out to them. It's been my experience, they've been very quick to respond and provide information and help me as well as other fleets understand what they're trying to accomplish. The rest of the slide deck is not something that I'm going to address, but I've included it so when we send out the PDF version of this, you'll have something to reference. And these are different strategies and different things you're going to need to be working on in order to come up with compliance strategies for the purchase of zero emissions vehicles. So this is proactive work that you should be beginning as soon as possible. I'll just go through a couple of the slides, but there's at least 12 to 15 slides of information in here that I think will be helpful. An assessment of public EV charging station and hydrogen fueling infrastructure available within fleet's operational area, including the following information: reliability, their capacities, daily availability for use, the cost of the fuel, the site's nearest take-home vehicle overnight locations. You're going to need to do an assessment of your facilities to verify the electrical infrastructure capabilities are there to support EVs. And if you do that, you're going to need to be looking at amperage and voltage available, locations to nearest electrical panels or vaults. Do you have enough real estate at that facility when you install charging stations, because it will move the vehicles farther back into lanes of travel, paths of travel for vehicles? Well, you need to bring in additional service drops. Likelihood of the facility electricity being affected by public safety power shutoffs, the availability of backup generator power, utility billing demand charge thresholds. That's a critical one. I'll go through a couple more of these slides. Currently, the industry is really not focusing on vocational trucks for the early years of this regulation because they're the most difficult to build a zero emissions vehicle for. So they're going to be focusing on the low hanging fruit, the drayage trucks, your delivery trucks such as potato chip delivery trucks, lightweight trucks. Those are going to be the easiest ones for the manufacturers to produce and offer for sale in California. Once you get into the vocational trucks, it becomes much more difficult. But that doesn't mean you should wait on working on how you're going to respond in your needs to the manufacturers. You need to start doing that now. They're going to need to know a lot of different information about PTOs. Does the vehicle drive long distances and then operate off of a PTO? Does it drive short distances and then operate most of the day off the PTO? They're going to need a lot of data in order to design a vehicle that's going to meet your needs. And here's some more information. A lot of this can be gathered through telematics, GPS programs, and the technology that's offered out there today. A lot of this data is not going to be coming from your fuel station mileages. You're going to have to come up with this information another way. Again, there's several slides that I've included here, all the different questions that need to be answered in order to come up with a strategy for your particular fleet and how you're going to move forward in the future to meet these regulations. I wanted to thank everybody again for being on this webinar, especially all of the different associations that came together to get the word out and to bring this to you. You have my name, my contact information up in the right-hand corner.
So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me join you guys today. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I am calling from a very snowy Ontario, Canada. So it's a great pleasure to feel the secondhand bask of perhaps some California sunshine, as a secondhand. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you might be able to approach some of the reporting requirements that have come through using telematics data in a variety of different ways. And I'm going to explain specifically some ways that Geotab can help with that. So I will just go very quickly over who we are at Geotab. I'm assuming that most people have heard of us, but we are basically a telematics provider, and we have our hardware device installed in over 2 million vehicles around the world, with a lot of that coming from both Canada and the United States. We have offices all over the world, and we have a lot of different partners and a flourishing ecosystem of different kinds of solutions that basically sit on top of the core product that we offer, which is a hardware device, and our software solution where you can access all of the data from your telematics device. So I'd just like to kind of pull up one of the slides that David shared with us. So this is some of the information that you are asked to provide to CARB. So I just like to kind of talk through some of these points and kind of how I might approach being able to try and answer them, as well as highlighting, you know, where can you really see telematics being able to help you out with some of these questions. So of course, the easiest one, if you have telematics data, then you already know the answer to one of these questions. But really, a telematics device is really helping you have the gate to be able to access a lot of this other information. And so I'm just going to kind of go through what some of those pieces are. So we provide the data that's available around what trips all of the vehicles make. So if we are to then aggregate all those trips up, we can then determine the distance traveled daily, monthly, or for the amount of time that you need, the amount of time spent parking or idling, stopped. So if we, let's say, go back to what we have that we, you know, some of these requirements, you know, understanding you know, does a vehicle stay within approximately 50 miles of the indicated facility? This is something that you can answer with trips information. Percentage of vehicles that have a primary means of fueling at home base. This is another thing that you can answer with trips information. Things like that. These are very, very useful. This is a very useful piece of information that you'll be able to then aggregate and combine so that you're going to be able to answer some of these questions. The next piece that I'd like to just go over is the vehicle information. So we would be able to provide you with the VIN, which would then be able to give you all the other features that you might need. So it will be able to provide the weight class, which David went over some resources as how to get the gross vehicle weight limit, but we can also provide that. And then we also provide some vehicle features such as engine size and drivetrain. So as we can see here, you know, percentage of vehicles equipped with all-wheel drive. This is a great way to be able to answer that question. Odometer. So, you know, this is a pretty common. This will be a pretty common need if you're going to need to approximate the distance traveled over a long amount of time. Fuel up information and fuel type. So as we recall from the slide that David showed, we were able to see that there's a requirement to break down the vehicles by vehicle type. So we would be able to provide some of that information. And then engine measurements from the trailer is also something, it sounds like there's a few pieces of information that are required where you would be able to kind of access some approximation of that using our telematics device. Now, the other thing that I will mention is that there are some pieces of information that will be a little bit, perhaps will be a bit involved to get through just the core software offering. But the nice thing about Geotab is that the core product is really built in a way that there's supposed to be many things that are built on top of it. And then you're supposed to be able to access data through many different ways, which is going to allow you to more easily compile the information that you might need. So if, for example, if you're using our SDK, you may be able to compile all this information in a more flexible way. And if you're going to need some enhanced reporting for your trailers or things like that, you may be able to use some IOXs or other devices to be able to do some of that independently. So on top of the core hardware and software offering. So the other piece that I'd just like to mention as well is that some of this information is really around, you know, having to analyze the core activity of your fleet over a certain period of time. And this will require some larger scale aggregation that may be a little bit different from the kind of reporting, if you're using Geotab or another telematics provider, that we might be used to. You know, maybe you're used to be pulling, you know, distance traveled for a week or the past 2 weeks, but this looks like it's kind of taking it a step further to really try and unlock some of the core trends that exist in your fleet. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of those kind of higher level findings that you will want to incorporate. So This is how I would approach this kind of request. And so I'm just going to kind of walk you through it. So I'm going to talk about 2 examples today. So the percentage of vehicles that have a predictable usage pattern. And then also I kind of want to just quickly talk about this one piece where it's about the vehicle group that stays within approximately 50 miles of the indicated facility. So for the first piece, so the percentage of vehicles that have a predictable usage pattern, we at Geotab have actually been thinking about this for a number of years. And what we've been doing is the data and analytics team has been hard at work trying to understand, across our ecosystem of 100, as we've grown from 500,000, 1 million to 2 million vehicles, what does a typical driving pattern really look like? And so what we've done is we've taken a look across all of our 2 million vehicles and analyzed their driving behaviors to group vehicles into what we call vocations. So as you can imagine, as you can see on the slide here, we have an office worker. They're using their vehicles most to drive to work between 8 to 9 a.m., driving their vehicle a little bit in the afternoon and evening, and maybe going to pick up some lunch. So we're actually able to see, based on the driving patterns of this vehicle, this person is likely an office worker, and they fit into our sense of what an office worker's profile would look like if we looked at their driving trends. If we looked at a delivery or service vehicle, we can see that they're very, very busy during the kind of classic business hours, and then not as much driving happening outside of that time. So what that tells us, you can see here that these are 2 very distinct kind of driving patterns, and we're really able to kind of, once we take a look at the driving patterns over the course of 1 to 2 to 3 months, we can actually really start to see these diverge into different kinds of profiles. So we have 13 different profiles that that are kind of typical driving patterns, and about 70% of our vehicles fall into one of these 13 predictable usage patterns. So this is a very useful way that you can actually get all this information as a summary, and then the work is kind of already done for you in terms of being able to access the vocation and then use that into your report as saying, this is a vehicle that I've identified what their predictable usage pattern is, versus some of your vehicles where you're not really able to put a label on what that usage pattern looks like. The next piece, I'll just return to the slide to recall what we're talking about. So the next piece of information is answering the question, does the vehicle group stay within approximately 50 miles of the indicated facility? So here you can see just a few points on a map. It's just a quick sample. It doesn't actually reflect any particular person's driving behavior. I'm just using it for some illustrative purposes. But what you can actually do is chart the start and end points on a map, and then what you're able to do is approximate kind of what this driving range actually looks like. So if we can imagine this big red dot is where the vehicle spends its most time, that's its depot, that's where it returns every day. You can actually start to see, if you're looking at all of the different stops over time, you're going to be able to see what that kind of driving pattern looks like, and it's going to be very easy to see, this particular vehicle actually spends a lot of time, within that 50-mile radius, but it does spend a little bit of time, there's a couple of trips that go beyond that, but we're not really seeing, we're really able to say, this vehicle does spend the majority of its time, within that 50-mile radius that we're really interested in. And then the last thing that I just like to talk about is how you can put this all together with one of the products that we have that's offered by Geotab. So that is the data science package. So a lot of this data can be accessed using a data lake, basically. So we have all of the data organized into the different sources of data, and then you're able to see this data kind of a year going backwards, and then from when you sign up, and then every day kind of going forward, you'll be able to see your previous day's data and how it adds. So being able to provide this information in a report, you can use a combination of the any kind of work that you would want to do in the data science package, as well as reporting that could come from our software solution. I'm going to leave it there, but that is essentially how we at Geotab would approach to build this kind of report. And I am happy to answer any questions.
We now have our panel up and can begin having a discussion amongst our panel. Maybe I could sort of turn the panel leadership over to Keith, but kick it off with a beginning question to Dave Worthington. And that is, it sounded like you had a very exhaustive set of questions that need to be answered by both fleets and people who have buildings where fleets show up. And when is that all due? And are there extensions available? And is it really as exhaustive as it sounded like when you brought it up? And then I'm going to kick the rest of the moderation over to you, Keith.
Okay.
Yeah, so the list that I provided is all the questions that came to my mind when I started reading the Advanced Clean Transportation Regulation and then looking through some of the information for the Advanced Clean Fleet Regulation that they're working on. And it comes from years of dealing with electric vehicles and the challenges that they present as far as the infrastructure. So I just started going through all the different questions I had. One of the big questions was hydrogen refueling stations. How much does it cost to build your own hydrogen fueling station? Have a vendor do it for you. How many hydrogen fueling stations are there in California? And last time I checked, there's 125. Now compare that to gasoline and diesel stations in California, which number between 8 and 10,000, gives you an idea of the infrastructure challenge that we have if we're going to be using hydrogen fuel as our zero emissions vehicle. The electric vehicle charging stations, a majority of them that are in California, which has grown exponentially over the last 5 years, are level 2. And when we get into these much larger trucks, they're going to be DC and very high amperage. So that means bringing in the infrastructure. Mr. Rentschler, who's on the panel today, can answer in detail the challenges that he has with his transit fleet and converting them over to electric buses. These are all questions that take time to answer. And to be honest, we're not going to have that much time. These regulations are coming on board very quickly. And typically these type of infrastructure projects take anywhere from 2 to 4 years. We may not have 2 to 4 years. So this is going to bring all of the different resources within your organization together, because it's going to be the budget office. It's going to be facility people. It's going to be retraining your fleet technicians. It's also going to involve union negotiations, because you're going to be changing what skill sets these technicians and mechanics are going to have. You're going to have to be dealing with all of your customers. They're going to have to realize that it's something new, something different, and they're going to have to get used, instead of looking at a gas gauge, looking at some other gauge of how much range they have for a particular vehicle in a particular application. This is, it's going to be very challenging, and the COVID-19 has not made things any easier for us. A lot of budgets, particularly in governments, agencies, are being stretched thin because of COVID-19, and the impacts will be very similar to what we faced during the Great Recession that started in 2008 and 9, where fleet budgets were for acquisitions of assets were stripped out. It's very challenging. The sooner you look at the questions that I had and that other fleet people had that I incorporated in those slides, the better off you will be, because you need to start actually making those decisions right away, gathering the data and making decisions immediately.
David, if I can comment here, I pasted in the link to CARB's website for the one-time reporting. That will get you to the guide that will tell you all the information and how to report keep in mind it's April 1st is your deadline. And David Worthington has some good insights onto what CARB told us about the reporting.
Yeah, Mr. Rentschler and I have been involved with CARB staff prior to the board passing the ACT regulation and since then. And one of the common themes that we have heard is that the fleets that do not submit their report by April 1st, there is no grace period. And there could be fines. And if there are fines associated with any fleet, they're talking about $10,000 per day. So there's a huge incentive to come up with all this data, get it into the CARB spreadsheet and get it submitted before April 1st. And for small fleets, I don't foresee that being a problem if you got a fleet under 150, 200 vehicles. But when you start talking about fleets that have between 1,000 and 6,000 or 10,000 vehicles, trucks out there in California, that's a lot of data, a lot of it, analyzing the data and trying to get it all into the right bins in a fairly large Excel spreadsheet as well. This is very, very challenging. CARB knows that, but they have the deadline. And from the conversations we had, they're not going to extend the deadline. There's not going to be a grace period. And they are more than willing to use their authority to fine fleets if they did not report by April 1st.
I think from my approach, or from my perspective, like a lot of things, we need to plan for the worst and hope for the best. We've made it perfectly clear through professional associations, League of California Cities, the California counties. We're very concerned about financial impact. So I think our role as fleet managers is to make sure we're sharing what the worst possible financial impacts could be and when they could start, and to start building those relationships with people that we don't typically interact with on a daily basis. We've got to reach out to our utilities. We've got to reach out to our facility departments and start surveying. As David laid out in his strategic planning components, he did a fantastic job of covering the bases as far as what we need to be doing proactively to do the planning for the worst and hoping for the best. And the hoping for the best is continuing to hope we're going to get some sort of financial relief in cities and counties up and down the state. We're going to continue to get incentives that hopefully will be apportioned to us in a manner that we don't have to be experts in grant writing, and that there's a lot of winners and losers from the state and the federal government. And I know Richard has some perspective on this, and hopefully Richard's still on here, but one of the things that Richard has shared recently is just the potential of when you're looking at the worst case financial impacts, what's it going to cost? Maybe we're currently collecting money to replace our fleet at the end of, a fleet asset at the end of its life at, 7, 10, 12 years, depending on its life cycle. But what's going to happen if that vehicle now is going to cost 150 to 200% of what we've collected, and we've got to start replacing those vehicles with all electric within 3 to 5 years. So one of the things I'm thinking about is, so let's figure out the priorities, where it's going to make sense first, where the manufacturers are going to have vehicles that could actually be accepted, and then what are we going to have to do to start educating our fleet customers to accept them when the day comes. We've got to prepare them in advance that these are regulations, these are laws, and there's really not much of a choice. So Richard's saying he's still muted, Tim. If you could let Richard maybe chime in, I'd love to hear from him and his perspective. And I know also that Jim and Richard are active in NAFA and the Government Affairs Group, and they're actually trying to do a lot of work on education at the federal level as well.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. And first of all, I want to thank everybody for those detailed presentations. I know it takes a lot of time and effort, and it's not easy to be the one to step forward, but if nobody does, we all get left behind. So clearly, the folks compiling and presenting this information did a great job. I think the underlying theme, as Keith highlighted, is the funding currently doesn't exist to even make this plan feasible. Regardless, we still, again, as Keith said, have to prepare as if it is. We have organized pretty thoroughly, I think, in fact, probably to a greater extent than I've ever seen the fleet industry or folks in California get organized, and that momentum continues to grow. As far as the reporting and taking these deadlines seriously, the real concern is once the reports are submitted, the extensive data that's being requested about vehicle type, usage, domicile area, can be used for probably two things. One, to validate that the fleet is making correct and appropriate decisions, or number two, to second guess, direct, or take the decision making out of the fleet manager or even that government entity or public fleet's hands. So that's obviously a major concern. And when you talk about the electrification, and the concept at ARB is that zero emission vehicles are a cost neutral proposal when you factor in the total cost of ownership, are really naive and not based in fact. And the requirement, if the decision is to go battery electric, and I think to David's point about the lack of hydrogen stations, electric vehicles are probably going to be the only option for quite some time. In order to cost effectively install the infrastructure, since most fleets operate from a depot model, that process needs to take place at a single time. In other words, if you're going to do trenching and increase the power coming to your facility, it's probably going to require coordination with the utility, a new trunk line or lines, and it's just not cost effective to do something like that, one or two charging installations at a time. So you're talking about a huge upfront capital expense for the infrastructure that has to be executed probably before you buy that first vehicle. So in order for us to be able to comply as best we may, it's really important for fleets out there to stay engaged, to communicate to your leadership, whether you work for a municipality, a utility, or a commercial fleet. Make clear the financial implications and also the potential issues caused by relying on only a handful of options being available now as far as vehicles go. It's never a good strategy to place all your eggs in one basket, especially when the technology or particular application hasn't been deployed beyond, say, the demonstration or pilot stage. So just being involved right now, having this discussion, networking with your fellow fleet managers, it's going to ensure that we're all going to be as successful as possible in complying with this regulation, but also hopefully steer the conversation to in a direction that seems a little bit more logical from those of us that have to live with this.
Jim, did we get you unmuted?
Yes, we did.
Want to share what's happening on the NAFA front at the federal level? Because we really didn't bring much up about this. Is also potentially happening at the federal level. And of course, NAFA has a lot of fleets that operate in California. So there is a concern there.
Yes. So this group has had a few meetings with NAFA's attorney back in Washington, D.C., Patrick O'Connor, and he's trying to rally some support on the federal level with a lot of organizations, outside of California. And we're just trying to keep him in tow as we have these meetings with CARB. Regarding the reporting, we chose to submit our fleet a couple weeks ago And we found that spreadsheet in their instructions to be pretty well prepared. It was pretty easy to fill it out. The problem is you can't cut and paste anything. Everything has to be input within their parameters. But the one thing we found, we had 383 vehicles that needed to be reported, and it was like 18 lines per terminal that we had. And one of the things we found is over 90% of our fleet looks like it can operate within a 100-mile range every day. But what they're not asking is, how much idling, queuing, or power takeoff operation is happening with these vehicles. And I would say it's more like less than 50% of our vehicles that could operate within a 100-mile range in a day. So I think that's one of the things that, as we get some reporting in and CARB's looking at that, we need to be able to point out to them that a majority of the equipment that this group is operating, it's not just straight driving to and from one place or another. They're carrying loads and they're doing other operations that aren't creating miles.
Thank you, Jim.
I just wanted to quickly mention, sort of in line with some of the issues that you raised. Dave Rentschler has a lot of experience because he has a transit fleet. He was hit earlier probably than most other fleets with the requirement to figure out what to do with heavy duty electric vehicles at a corporation yard. And he will be talking about that much more extensively at our next workshop. And at our final workshop, we'll also be doing some presentations on transition planning, sort of how people can figure out where to go and what they can do. I was going to mention one other thing, and that was relative to VIN numbers. I think it's been brought up a couple times, but I did have a chance to use the NHTSA VIN number system. They actually have a batch submittal part as well as an individual submittal part. And you do get a very significant amount of information back relative to year, make, model, gross vehicle weight rating, engine type, all that from the VIN. So there is a lot of information you can get if you don't have it on record right now.
I don't know, my thoughts here are fairly simple in addition to what's already been said. I think that, clearly the immediate task is to come up with the data, and we've talked about that, but the bigger task, of course, then is what you have to replace in your fleet, how you're going to fund that, how you're going to take care of the infrastructure and so forth. Hopefully the data collection assists you in that, and you can get, at least in a rough sense, towards ascertaining the need, right? And look at, of those vehicles that fall under this requirement, when do they age out? How much capital, if you do have a central fund, how much capital have you accumulated against them? Start doing some estimating maybe about what it's going to take, at that point in their life cycle compared to the deadlines that we're looking at here. What's it going to take in terms of money, and start talking to your financial folks and letting those really rough numbers be known. Clearly it's, while they're not giving us a lot of time necessarily, it's given what's the market availability is, it's, we're in a conflict here. The market availability is slim to be able to say, I need a 35-foot electric boom truck. You're not going to find that. So therefore you don't know the price, right? If that's what to use that example. But maybe you can estimate that. Maybe you can come up with some figures, by year, and use that to start doing some planning, and then just flesh it out as the requirements become more firm and there's more information about what's available and what it costs. Infrastructure is clearly a headache, and if you've not done this so far for EVs, it takes 10 times more coordination and time than you might expect. Just because you're working with folks, generally, at least in the municipal operation that I'm familiar with, you know, we're sort of silo based, and the facilities folks are more interested in the other projects that are already in their agenda than they are in getting your charging stations done. And the sooner you can get together with them and have a relationship, if you haven't done so already, it's going to pay huge dividends. So I don't know. Those are some initial thoughts I have.
I think that's a great point, Dan, about building those relationships with your facilities folks, so your electrical engineers. If you don't have that internal capacity, you've got to figure out a way to hire a consultant to come in. I know that David Rensler did that for his transit group, and it was quite expensive, David. Wasn't that right? How much did you contract for? And then they determined that neither your facility or you had adequate space even for the charging infrastructure you needed for your transit buses.
Yeah, so I can talk about that a little bit. So we spent $694,000 for one of our consultant agreements. For our transit side, we spent another $120,000 on our public works side. We're doing two consultants, same consultant company, working on two different plans at the same time. But there were a few things I wanted to bring up. One is real estate. What you're not going to realize until you do this is right now your parking spaces have a 6-inch wide painted stripe. You're going to end up putting a 3-foot wide raised concrete with bollards and chargers. If you're doing parallel parking, you know, side by side, you've got them, you know, 13, 14 in a row. Now you're going to need more real estate. That's one of the issues we found, trying to find more real estate in our yard and how to move things around in the yard to make that work. Not every vehicle is going to need a charger. You're going to find that out when you do your reporting or start collecting your data. You're also going to find out what facilities. We're a city, so obviously there's many facilities throughout the city that are going to need chargers. Some are going to need 1, some are going to need 10. You won't find that out until you start finding out what classification vehicles are located at what facilities throughout your city or your county. What electricity is available. So we are surrounded. We have a 14.5 acre corporation yard, and we're surrounded by residential. So we have 208 in this area. That's an interesting situation to be in when you need 480 for your chargers. So we're going to put somebody mentioned we're working on our transit. We're looking at putting 1.4 megawatts into the far side of our yard and 150 kilowatt chargers at a cost of $4 million in the first phase. So parking spaces, again, issues. You got to look at turning radiuses. You'll have to get with your planning department. Again, with residential around us, we can't just put up a fence and call it good. They want all kinds of beautification and landscaping and things like that that take up more money and more space. Let's see. Interesting article I read in Fleet Forward last week. For those of you that get that newsletter, they took just a Tesla Tesla, I think it's a Model X, the SUV, has a 4,500 pound tow rating, and they hooked up 3,200 pound trailer to it. And they did a test on somewhere here in California, I forget where. There's a 7% grade for 8 miles. So at the bottom of the grade, they had a 150-mile range left on the dash. And they went to the top of that 8-mile grade. They had 30 miles left on the range.
Mm.
And so that was interesting to find out that. So then farther in the article, it talks about advertised horsepower was 450. That's at 100% charge. At a 20% battery charge, they put it on the dyno. It had 67 horsepower. So these are things that people may not be thinking of that you're really going to need to think of when you're talking to your OEMs about what types of vehicles. We're looking at replacing our F450s with Kenworth K270Es cab overs. The order bank is open, so you can order those along with the Kenworth K370E cab over battery electrics. The T680E Kenworth has an electric PTO option, so we're looking at that for our 10-wheel dump trucks. And when you really sit down and you look at your fleet, and this filling out this information will require you to take a look at it, you'll find out what is, and this was a good exercise we did, is what's due for replacement in 24, 25, and 26. Because those years, 50% of your purchases are gonna, most likely, this regulation hasn't passed yet. It'll be up for vote on December 9th of this year. So once it passes, you won't have much time to figure out what you're gonna buy. But 24, 25, and 26, 50% of your class 2B over 8,500 GVWR and above. Take a look at what's due those 3 years and then figure out what's on the market right now? What can I replace that I know is out there for sale? Not what's coming, because as we all know with the F-150, it was supposed to be out in 21. First quarter of 21, it was supposed to be on the market. Then fourth quarter of 21, now it's 22. LG Chem, SK Industries got in their legal battle. LG Chem won, got a ruling that says SK Industries can't import battery parts for 10 years to the United States. SK Industries is the one that's supplying batteries for the Ford F-150. Well, now what are you going to do? So Ford stepped in. They got a 4-year reprieve so they can use the SK Industry battery for 4 years, but they're going to have to find a new battery source. So there's a lot of stuff in the electric industry that you got to keep track of, or you're not going to know what to buy. There's somebody that had a something in the chat box about when it comes to CARB report, can you think of any vehicles operated by a police or fire department that would not meet the emergency vehicles definition of the vehicle code? So we looked at that very early on. We gave all of the language from the regulations to our legal city legal department. They came back with anything that is assigned to the police department or the fire department is exempt. So we're going to run with that. I suggest you get with your own legal teams and do the same. It goes by vehicle code. So our city attorney decided that anything that's assigned or owned by the police department or fire department is exempt because an officer might get in it, which is what the vehicle code says. I can't speak for your city or county or or business, but I do suggest you discuss with your legal team. Some interesting things, and I'll talk about more in depth at the next seminar. Things you wouldn't think of. Our floor in our shop, you stick a magnet on the concrete and it sticks. We have a ferrous concrete floor. You can't have that with battery electric vehicles. So our floor is conductive. So we're going to have to figure out what to do about that. We've got some ideas on what we might do, but looking back when this shop was built in 1990, they put metal in the concrete so that it would be strong enough for heavy duty vehicles to come in and out of the shop. So take a look at we had to go through our complete building plans from when the building was built. Luckily, our other facility is police and fire, public safety vehicles, so we're not going to concentrate on that. We're just going to concentrate on the main shop right now. Another thing that was really interesting is bay space. Our bays are not as big as they're going to need to be. On our transit side, our bay width is going to have to be 25 feet in order to get the scaffolding around it that we're going to need to get to the batteries that are up on top of the buses. So any of you that have transit, any type of transit, be thinking about that. So I'll kind of cut it off there because I don't want to give all my things to talk about next at the next webinar.
Thank you, David.
I was just going to say that I've had a chance to have a number of conversations with David, and he's only just sort of skimmed the surface of the things he's learned are little sources of massive amounts of money that you need to be planning on figuring out how you're going to get your hands on. And any of you that have governing boards, they need to know that they're going to have to come up with money. It's not all coming from the state by any stretch of the imagination.
I'm laying down.
Yeah, so on that, Tim, when the consultant gave their first assessment of the things we're going to have to do to one of our shops, it was $3.5 million of retrofitting, and the city engineer looked at me and said, "So you do have this budgeted, right?" I said, "No, we don't have a dime budgeted for this. The city's going to have to come up with the money somewhere, not fleet."
And that's just your facility. I mean, refuse rates go up because the cost of the refuse equipment is going to go up. Your shop hourly rate's going to have to go up because you're going to have to recover the cost so you can budget for it. The costs are going to be spread across a broad spectrum, and your governing boards need to know they're going to need a lot more money to meet these requirements, and they need to be thinking about it now. Pardon me for getting in with that, Keith, but it just seems like an important point. It's not just your problem, it's your governing board's problem.
So
I think
that's a good point to bring up, Tim, about refuse, because we don't do refuse here. I know Keith does, but we don't do it here. We contract it out. So the franchise agreement at City Hall, we don't have anything to do with that franchise agreement. I had to get with the assistant director over there and explain some of the regulation that has to do with that. He's going to have to modify their franchise agreement with the garbage company to require them to put infrastructure and purchase vehicles to meet the regulation, which caused a really big issue at City Hall. So again, the more information you can put out as quick as possible is better for the city in general.
Thank you, David. Do we have any other comments from our panelists or questions from the participants?
Keith, I'd like to add, because we are talking about maintenance facilities, just real quick. If you're looking at the hydrogen electric vehicles as an option, be aware that permitting of maintenance facility can be a challenge. It's no different than converting over to a compressed natural gas maintenance facility. And the numbers to retrofit a facility are anywhere from $750,000 to $2 million, depending on the size of the facility. And in some cases, you would have to start with a brand new facility just to be able to open up the hydrogen system, deal with the tanks. You may want to start looking at your local dealer network and finding out if they're going to be investing significantly in upgrading their facilities, and choose to do just minor maintenance in your own and send any of the hydrogen work directly to your local dealerships if you have one that's nearby. But again, it's a challenge that people need to be aware of. No matter what direction we're going, we're going to be dealing with facilities, we're going to be dealing with real estate, and it's all going to be very costly.
Jim, did I see you chiming in there a minute ago? No?
I'm good.
Oh, there he is. Go. Any comments, Jim? I think the most important thing, again, is we just continue to share our experiences as we get through this, and we learn. We're going to continue to learn, and hopefully we can work together to overcome all these challenges.
Listening to everybody, one thing that comes through that I wanted to emphasize is, geez, if you don't have good data in your system right now, if you don't have an FMIS that's really up to speed, or you don't have a good telematics system to get you data, you're really going to be on the short end of the stick when it comes time to plan what's the best replacement vehicle. You're going to find yourself going out there and collecting data manually. It's just going to slow down your effort. So in this sort of almost interim period where we don't know yet what we're going to buy and how many we're going to buy necessarily, getting your data set up to snuff is something that will pay huge dividends for you once you do start planning and purchasing and so forth. So yeah, I just wanted to make that point.